Hi, my name is April. Let's talk about books. This is my July wrap-up. This month I read 18 books. Here are my thoughts. The first book I completed was A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. This is a book about Count Ilyich Rostov, who after the Russian Revolution was declared a non-person and sentenced to live in the Hotel Metropole in Moscow for the rest of his life. He did manage to live there for 30 years, along the way making friends with the staff and some of the clientele. I thought at first that this book was really slow moving, but then I began to appreciate the pacing. I really liked that the Count made the most of his time spent in the hotel. You would think that he would get a little bit stir crazy, but he really did work hard to make relationships with the people inside the hotel, and overall I just really loved this book. It was just a really quiet, pleasant read. The second book I read was Lionheart by A.C. Gagan. This is the third in a YA trilogy about Scarlet. The conceit of this series is that Will Scarlet, one of Robin Hood's merry men, is actually a woman. And I thought this was a satisfying conclusion to the trilogy. There's really not much more to say about it than that. The third book I read was also a YA book. It was called Alex Approximately. It's by Jen Bennett. This was sold to me as a YA version of You've Got Mail, in which the main character, whose name I've forgotten, is she's friends with somebody, she's made friends with somebody online, and then she moves across the country, and oh my god, she's in the same place as the person with whom she's made friends, and then she gets a job in this weirdo museum, and there's this really hot but mean manager there, and I mean, I guess you can probably figure out where it goes from there. It was a quick read. It wasn't anything memorable at all. I prefer You Got Mail, or even Shop Around the Corner, or for that matter, The Good Old Summertime, which is a musical starring Judy Garland. All of them have the same story. The next book that I read is called Mortal Heart. It's by Robin Lefevre. This is also the third in a trilogy. This is the trilogy His Fair Assassins, which is about some women in medieval Brittany who live in this convent which is dedicated to the god of death. Again, it was an okay end to the trilogy. I don't really want to say too much about it. I mean, I liked it. There you go. The next book that I read, again YA, because I guess I had a moment this summer, was called Daughter of the Pirate King by Tricia Levenseller. This is about a pirate named Alosa. She's the Pirate King's daughter. I mean, you can tell from the title, and she deliberately allows herself to be captured by a rival pirate crew, and while on board there, she falls for the first mate, whose name is Ryden, and she's supposed to find out information about them. That's why she allowed herself to get captured. I didn't really care for this book very much, to be quite honest. I didn't find the love story believable. I didn't find Alosa the character believable, and then I was kind of getting into it, and then bam, introducing some magic. I feel like we've already got piracy. We could have just stayed with, you know, realism for a little while without introducing some magical elements that really makes me mad. The next book that I read was an audiobook, actually, and it's called Too Fat, Too Slutty, Too Loud, The Rise and Fall of the Unruly Woman by Anne Helen Peterson. I really enjoyed this book. This is about how society views women who kind of step out of, I guess, what we've defined as being feminine. She talks about Serena Williams, she talks about Hillary Clinton, Melissa McCarthy, Nicki Minaj, all of these women who have committed the error, I guess, of being too much of something. And I liked this book because I am a feminist, and because I get real mad about how people treat women in society, but also because it really kind of opened my eyes to some of my own internalized misogyny, things that I hadn't addressed within myself, because I admit that I had some of these opinions about some of the women whom Peterson speaks of in the book, where, you know, I would kind of side-eye people for doing various things, and it was pointed out to me, or I finally realized that, oh, I do this because I've been conditioned to think this way. So it was just really a learning experience for me. So I really liked it a lot. The next book I read was Who Thought This Was a Good Idea and Other Questions You Should Have Answers to When You Work in the White House by Alyssa Mastromonaco. She was the director of Barack Obama's scheduling during his presidential campaign, and then when he became president, she became the Deputy Chief of Staff of Operations. And I liked this book because I really like knowing what's going on behind the scenes of various operations, and I learned through listening to this book, it was an audiobook, that I don't have the organizational skills that it would take to work in the White House. I really enjoyed this book because it taught me a lot, and the part that I particularly liked was where Mastromonaco talks about what happened during Hurricane Sandy and the White House's response to Hurricane Sandy, and it was pretty much about how she had to like put together all of these operations like rescue and getting aid to people who were snowed in during Hurricane Sandy. And it really made me think that it really made me wonder if our current administration is prepared for that level of disaster right now. Spoiler, I don't think so. I listened to yet another audiobook, this one by Mindy Kaling, which is called Why Not Me? This is her second memoir. During this one, she talks about putting together her show, The Mindy Project, and the various things that go into that. I really like her voice. She read this audiobook herself, and when I say I like her voice, I meant her writing voice, but also it was really nice to hear her expression put into the words that she wrote. I just found this really enjoyable. The next book that I listened to was Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This is one of my top 5 for the month. It's a relatively short book, both in reading and in the audiobook, and I learned a lot. And you would think probably that here in America, and especially I live in the South, so we hear about racism a lot, that there wouldn't be too much more to learn. But I really appreciated Coates' the way that he opened up this dialogue. It is a letter to his son, and it follows the acquittal of Mike Brown's killer, who was a police officer, which was also a pretty, it was a pretty devastating event around here as well, and I kind of took it personally myself. And so I, again, learned a lot. And as a teacher, we're often taught to consider our students' backgrounds and experiences, and while I can do that, sometimes I can only really draw on what I'm told or what I've experienced myself. And so Coates kind of opened up my eyes to how African American students kind of, how they might walk differently into a school that is majority white, like the one that I teach in. And so I feel like it's going to help me have a deeper understanding of how to speak to these students and how to relate to them, and just to have kind of an empathy for them. Oh God, that sounds really white saviorish of me, and that's not what I mean. But again, it was a learning experience. We'll just put it that way. The next book I read was Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. I read this in anticipation of the upcoming movie that I'm really excited about. However, I will say I didn't really enjoy reading this book at all. Agatha Christie has this thing she does, and it's happened in more than one novel, where she holds out until the very last chapter this one tiny clue that comes out of nowhere, and it fits into place, and boom, everything is solved. And I read mysteries a lot. I love mysteries, and I am trash at solving them. I can't do that for the life of me. However, I feel like she really plays us dirty sometimes, because she leaves out this one really super important bit of information till the very end, and who's going to be able to solve it without that? Not me. Well, Poirot apparently. But like I said, this is not my favorite. I don't really like Poirot anyway. I'm a Miss Marple girl all the way. But I mean, I'm not sorry I read it. I'm still looking forward to the movie. The next book was my favorite book of the month, and maybe my favorite book that I have read all year. It is an audiobook, and it's called Dr. Mooter's Marvels. It's by Kristen O'Keefe Actowitz. And I I love weird stuff. So I have known about the Mutter Museum in Pennsylvania for a really long time based on various programs and documentaries and things that I have watched. And this is a medical museum, and the man who kind of endowed it was a man named Thomas Dent Mutter, who was a doctor in the early 1800s. He was orphaned at a young age due to yellow fever outbreaks and became a doctor. He went to Paris. He started learning about plastic surgery, which I did not think that was a thing in the early 1800s, but evidently he was a rock star at it. So he would, during that time in medical colleges, he taught at a medical college in Philadelphia. Part of the learning process was like a doctor would perform a surgery and there would be a whole bunch of people around looking at him, watching him do it. And so he would do things like repair cleft palates, he would repair burn victims, scarring, and all of this stuff that really helped increase the quality of life for people who had pretty much given up. It says in the book that like these patients would come to him and say, well, if you can't help me, I might just kill myself. And like mean it. Like they wouldn't say it as airily as that, but they would really mean it because their lives were just, they couldn't see any point in going forward given their injuries. So he would help them out, and people really liked him, and he seemed to be super awesome. And the book also talks about like this other guy who was not exactly a rival, but kind of a counterpoint to him, I guess. His name was Charles D. Meggs, and he was a butthole. I hate him, and if I could go back in time, I would, and I would kick him in the knee because he made me so mad. He was one who thought, no, doctors don't spread disease, germs aren't a real thing, let's not use anesthesia because we all deserve to have pain. If God wanted us to feel good during birth, then he wouldn't have had Eve steal the apple and all this other jerky stuff. But like the fact that I got so worked up about it tells me exactly how much I liked this book, and I just really felt joyous and happy the entire time I was listening to it. And I understand that that seems really weird in itself, and I can't explain it because ordinarily I cannot listen to stuff about medicine and like surgeries. I can't watch them. That is not for me. I do not like guts. But this was so interesting. I thought the reader did a really good job, and as a bonus, the reader, whose name I've forgotten to write down, but he sounds like the narrator on Disney educational films. So I actually went and watched a little bit of Donald Duck in Mathmagic Land just to kind of confirm what I thought, and it's true, he does sound exactly like that narrator. So for those of us who grew up in a certain time period when, you know, your math teacher might show you something like that, it's a little bit of nostalgia. So like I said, that was my favorite book of July and possibly of this year. The next book I read was called Ceremony. It's by Leslie Marmon Silko. During this month also, I went through a mini kick of reading books about Native Americans, and this one is about a veteran of World War II. He was in the Pacific Theater. His name is Teo, and he comes back to his reservation obviously with a bunch of PTSD related problems. He spends a lot of time getting drunk and throwing up, which I feel like is an appropriate response, especially if you're not going to be receiving any medical attention. In the book, Silko talks about how Native Americans would return to America when they had their uniforms on during the war. They were heroes and everybody loved them, but then they got back and they lost the uniforms and they were back to being more or less second-class citizens, if that, let's be real. So this is a fictional book, but Teo's family is really concerned about him, and he's basically dying by inches. And so as a potential cure, they have a medicine man lead him through this ceremony, but part of the ceremony is like this, I'm not going to say quest, but let's just say like a spiritual journey that Teo has to embark on himself. And he just, like, through the book, he just kind of feels himself getting better due to some of the things that he does. And I mean, it's not like magic stuff, but just it reminded me a little bit of kind of crawling out of a depression, which is something that I do have experience with, where it's just little by little and you kind of have setbacks every day, or not every day, but you kind of have setbacks along the way. And I thought overall that this was a really, I'm not going to say enjoyable book, but I liked reading it. It's interwoven with stories of the Pueblo people's gods and goddesses and like creation stories and so on, and written in poem form, but probably meant to be sung. And I really liked the reading of this book. The next book that I read is called The Girl Who Saved the King of Sweden. It's by Jonas Jonasson, and it's translated by Rachel Wilson Broyles. And this book, from start to finish, was a whirlwind. It is a comedy. It is like absurd comedy. It reminded me, as I was reading it, of Hitchhiker's Guide. It also reminded me of Arrested Development, the 4th season that was on Netflix, where there are so many twists and turns, and you like cut around a corner and boom, here's something that maybe was in the first episode and it's coming back to get you. The story of this book is, or the main character of this book is a South African girl whose name is Nombeko, and she is really, really smart. By the time she's 14, she's in charge of the sanitation department in Soweto, and through a series of events, she makes her way to Sweden. She hooks up with these guys whose dad was super against the monarchy, and at any rate, just because of Nombeko's past and the things that she knows, the things that she went through, she is able to meet the King of Sweden, and she's also able to keep him from getting bombed. I don't really know how to describe this. I just had so much fun reading this book, and I laughed out loud several times. The next book that I read was The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue. It's by Mackenzie Lee, and this is a book that I got through Owl Crate. It's a YA book. The main character, Monty, I think this is in the 1800s. He's sent on the grand tour of Europe, kind of as his last hurrah, because his dad's fixing to make him come back and learn how to run the estate. So Monty is bisexual. He is traveling with his best friend Percy, who is biracial, and he is traveling with his own sister Felicity. So there was a lot of hype about this book, and I expected it to be way better than I actually found it. And it's probably because I'm not really the audience for this. I might be too old for it. I thought Monty was a jerk. Through certain jerkish things that he did, his whole little group gets in trouble, and now they have people trying to find them, and also surprise magic. I cannot stand it, guys. I cannot. So not a great book for me. I'm probably going to donate it to my school library. And the next 3 books are ones that I read for the BookTubeathon, and I'll link in the description box a video to where I talk more in depth about those. Lakota Woman by Mary Crow Dog. This is a book that I'm probably not going to shut up about for a while. I really liked this book. I learned a lot about the way that Americans treat their native people, which P.S. is in a crappy way. Mrs. Eris Goes to Parliament, which is the 3rd Mrs. Eris book by Paul Gallico, and The Lone Ranger and Tonto Fistfight in Heaven by Sherman Alexie. I enjoyed all 3 of those books. And the final book that I read in the month of July is Theft by Finding, The Diaries 1977 through 2002, David Sedaris. And I didn't finish this in time to complete the BookTubeathon challenge, but I did listen to this audiobook. It is read by David Sedaris. I do love listening to him read his own stuff. He is hilarious. There was a lot of sound design in this that I wasn't expecting, and that really added to the book. I don't really know what to say. Like, these are just excerpts from the diaries that he's kept for, I mean, like 40 years. And sometimes the way that Sedaris looks at things is so outside of how, I'm gonna say, normals would, but it's just hilarious. Like, he'll be telling you like this serious story, and then he'll kick it with just this random observation that will take you off guard. I laughed out loud so many times while I was listening to this book. I loved every minute of it. It was really, really good. I can't wait for the next edition when he talks about, I guess, 2003 through the present. I'm really looking forward to that as well. But I super love this book. So those are my 18 books for the month of July. If you've read any of those, let me know. We'll talk about it in the comments. And if you want to share what you read in July, please let me know that as well. Goodbyes are always awkward, so end the video.